Principal Jonathan Crass adjusted his webcam, his face filling the screen of 32 separate Zoom windows. The faculty of Washington Heights Middle School stared back at him, some properly framed, others showing only foreheads or chins. The familiar blue-gray interface had become their new meeting room. "Thank you all for joining this emergency staff meeting," Crass began, his voice carrying the practiced gravity of someone delivering prepared remarks. "As you've likely heard, we've received confirmation of multiple SARS-CoV-21 cases in the district. The school board, in conjunction with state health officials, has made the difficult but necessary decision to transition to remote learning, effective immediately." A chorus of reactions filled the audio, sighs, murmurs, and a few sharp intakes of breath. Crass raised his hand for silence. "I know this is sudden, but we must prioritize the health and safety of our students and staff. The virus has shown to be highly transmissible, and we cannot risk." "I completely agree," interrupted Jennifer Sampson, the 7th grade science teacher. Her voice wavered with emotion. "My mother's a nurse, and she's been telling me horror stories about the hospitals preparing for overflow capacity. We can't put our kids at risk." Several teachers nodded in agreement, their video feeds bobbing up and down. Margaret Wilson, the veteran English teacher, unmuted herself. "It's the only responsible choice. We can adapt our lessons. The children's lives must come first." But Erin Sullivan, who taught 8th grade mathematics, wasn't convinced. She'd been analyzing the data herself, spending late nights poring over case statistics and mortality rates. "With all due respect," she said, leaning closer to her camera, "I have serious concerns about this decision. The data I've reviewed shows the mortality rate for school-age children is negligible. What about the students who don't have reliable internet access? Or proper devices?" She paused, gathering courage. "The Thompson twins in my 3rd period can barely afford school supplies, let alone high-speed internet. And what about Jimmy Martinez? He's already struggling with algebra. How is he supposed to grasp complex concepts through a screen?" The meeting grew quiet. Crass' expression hardened slightly, though his diplomatic smile remained fixed. "Those are valid concerns, Ms. Sullivan," he replied, his tone carrying a subtle edge. "The district is working on providing Wi-Fi hotspots to students in need. As for the quality of education," he straightened his tie, "we'll adapt. We have to. Unless you're suggesting we risk lives." Erin refused to back down. "I'm suggesting we look at this holistically. The developmental impact of isolation, the technological divide between economic classes, the challenges of maintaining student engagement through Zoom. These are real issues that could affect our students for years to come. This feels like a massive overreaction that could do more harm than good." "I have to agree with Erin," David Patterson, the physical education teacher, chimed in. "How am I supposed to teach PE through a computer screen? And what about the kids who use school as an escape from troubled home lives? Or those who rely on school meals?" Crass' smile tightened further. "The decision has already been made. We'll be receiving detailed protocols for remote instruction tomorrow morning. I expect everyone to review and implement them without exception." He glanced at his watch. "Now, let's discuss the logistics of this transition." As the meeting continued, Erin noticed something odd. The principal kept glancing at his phone, his face showing fleeting expressions of concern. During a particularly heated discussion about assessment methods, she saw him quickly type something, his fingers moving with unusual urgency. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than they were being told. Something about the hastiness of the decision, the rigidity of the implementation, and Crass' unusual behavior set off warning bells in her mind. But for now, she remained silent, taking notes and watching carefully, unaware that her suspicions would soon lead her down a path that would change everything she thought she knew about education. Martin Shaw's office overlooked the Geneva skyline from the top floor of the World Economic Council headquarters. He sat behind his imposing mahogany desk, facing Michael Carter, the newly appointed Global Education Director, a position Shaw had personally ensured he received. "You understand, Michael," Shaw said, swirling aged scotch in a crystal tumbler, "that education is the key to controlling future generations. An informed population asks questions. A properly guided one follows directions." Carter nodded eagerly, like a puppy seeking approval. "Of course, Mr. Shaw. The pandemic has given us an unprecedented opportunity to reshape educational standards." "Precisely." Shaw placed his glass down and pulled up a holographic display showing global education metrics. "Our analysis shows that traditional education, Emphasizing critical thinking, advanced mathematics, and scientific reasoning creates resistance to unified global governance. We've already begun promoting alternative university programs, Carter reported, consulting his tablet. Gender studies, social justice administration, global citizenship. Degrees that foster dependence on institutional authority rather than independent thinking. Applications are up 300% since we began offering guaranteed government positions to graduates. Shaw's thin lips curved into a smile. Excellent. And the primary education initiatives. As directed, we're implementing the new mathematical framework. Simple arithmetic now requires 12 steps instead of 3. We're calling it inclusive mathematics. Anyone who criticizes it is labeled as opposed to educational equity. And reading comprehension? We've replaced phonics with whole word recognition. Children are learning to memorize words as shapes rather than understanding letter sounds. Within a generation, they'll struggle to read anything not pre-approved by our content distribution networks. Shaw nodded approvingly. The beauty of it is, Michael, they'll think they're educated. They'll have degrees, certificates, titles, but no real ability to think critically or solve problems independently. There has been some resistance, Carter admitted nervously. A few teachers are questioning the new methods. Like this Erin Sullivan? Shaw pulled up her file on the holographic display. We have ways of dealing with dissidents. For now, the pandemic provides perfect cover for our reforms. Parents are too busy surviving to notice their children are being taught to stop thinking. And the technological divide? A feature, not a bug, Shaw replied coldly. The poor will fall behind, creating a permanent underclass dependent on government assistance. The wealthy will put their children in private schools that still teach traditional methods. After all, we need some people capable of maintaining our systems. Carter shifted uncomfortably. It seems harsh. Shaw's eyes hardened. The harsh reality, Mr. Carter, is that an educated population is ungovernable. Look at history. Every revolution was led by educated dissidents. We're not destroying education. We're evolving it to create a more stable society. He stood and walked to the window. Of course, Mr. Shaw. Carter swallowed hard. I'll ensure the new standards are implemented globally. See that you do. Shaw turned back to his desk. The pandemic won't last forever, but its impact on education will echo for generations. That's the true power of what we're doing, not just controlling the present, but shaping the future. As Carter hurried out of the office, Shaw returned to his scotch, satisfied. The pieces were falling into place. Soon, critical thinking would become a relic of the past, replaced by obedient acceptance of whatever truth they chose to provide. And if teachers like Erin Sullivan stood in their way, well, the pandemic had a way of creating all sorts of unfortunate accidents. Erin Sullivan adjusted her ring light and checked her webcam setup one final time. The makeshift studio she'd created in her home office wasn't professional, but it served its purpose. Her YouTube channel, Education in Crisis, had grown from a few hundred subscribers to over 50,000 in just 3 months. Hey everyone, Ms. Sullivan here, she began, forcing a smile despite her growing concerns. Today we need to talk about something that's been keeping me up at night. I've been tracking my students' progress over the past 8 months, and the results are, well, they're heartbreaking. She shared her screen, displaying a simple graph. This shows the average math comprehension scores for my 8th grade classes. The red line is where they should be. The blue line shows where they actually are. She paused, letting the stark difference sink in. Most of my students are falling behind where they should be. Erin pulled up another document. But it's not just about remote learning anymore. I've received the new curriculum guidelines for next year, and honestly, I'm terrified for our kids' future. Let me show you what they're calling inclusive mathematics. She displayed a simple multiplication problem, 8 by 7. Under the old system, students learned multiplication tables and could solve this instantly. Under the new system, she switched to a complex flowchart. Students are required to follow 12 distinct steps, including emotional check-ins and numerical identity validation. They're not learning to calculate. They're learning to follow unnecessarily complicated procedures. Comments started flooding the live chat. Parents sharing similar concerns, teachers from other districts confirming the same changes. And it's not just math, Erin continued, her voice growing more passionate. The new reading curriculum abandons phonics entirely. Instead of learning how letters combine to make sounds, children are being taught to memorize whole words like pictures. They'll be able to recognize words they've been shown, but they'll struggle to read anything new. She leaned closer to the camera, lowering her voice slightly. I've been teaching for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like this. It's as if these new standards were deliberately designed to prevent actual learning. Jimmy Martinez, remember I mentioned him in an earlier video? He used to struggle with algebra, but was making progress. Now, with these new methods, he'll be completely lost. And he's not alone. Erin pulled up another chart. Test scores are already plummeting nationwide. Not just because of remote learning, but because teachers aren't being allowed to teach. And when parents complain, they're told they're opposing educational equity. But there's nothing equitable about failing to teach our children basic skills they'll need for the rest of their lives. Her phone buzzed on her desk, but she ignored it, focusing on her message. We're creating a generation of children who will struggle to read anything beyond pre-approved text, who can't perform basic math without complex aids, and who are being taught that questioning these methods is wrong. This isn't education, it's the systematic destruction of critical thinking skills. She glanced at the viewer count, 12,000 watching live. Her largest audience yet. I'm speaking out because somebody has to. Our children deserve better. They deserve real education, not whatever this is. If you're a parent, please pay attention to what your kids are being taught. If you're a teacher, don't be afraid to question these changes. Our children's futures depend on it. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she glanced down. I'll be back next week with more specific examples of these changes and their impacts. Until then, keep asking questions. Keep demanding better. Our kids are counting on us. She ended the stream and finally checked her phone. 2 messages from Principal Crass. 8:42 p.m. Saw your live stream. 8:43 p.m. My office. 7 a.m. tomorrow. Non-negotiable. Erin's hand trembled slightly as she set down her phone. She'd known this confrontation was coming, but that didn't make it any less frightening. Still, she thought of Jimmy, of all her students, and straightened her spine. Whatever happened tomorrow, she wasn't backing down. At precisely 7 a.m., Erin sat across from Principal Crass in his office. Morning sunlight glinted off his new Rolex as he gestured animatedly, his face flushed with anger. "Do you have any idea the position you've put me in?" he demanded. "The district is getting calls. The board is asking questions. This isn't what we need right now. What we need is to protect our students' education," Erin countered, noticing how his watch caught the light again. She'd seen him pull up in his new Porsche Cayenne that morning, a car that cost more than his annual salary. "Our kids are failing, Jonathan. Not just struggling, failing. How can you not see that? What I see is a teacher undermining district policy and creating panic among parents." He shuffled some papers on his desk. These new standards were developed by top educational experts. Were they? Because I've researched every aspect of these new methods, and none of them are supported by actual educational research. It's like they were designed to make learning harder. Crass' phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted. "I need to take this. Wait here." He stood abruptly, walking out of his office and closing the door behind him. Erin sat for a moment, hearing his muffled voice in the hallway. Her eyes drifted to his laptop, still open on his desk. The screen had dimmed but wasn't locked. I shouldn't, she thought. But then she remembered Jimmy Martinez's mother crying during their last parent conference, worried her son would never catch up. Before she could second-guess herself, Erin moved around the desk. A few quick mouse clicks brought up his email. The most recent was from an organization she didn't recognize, Global Education Initiative Foundation. She opened it. "Dear Mr. Crass, your continued cooperation in implementing the new educational standards has been noted and appreciated. As discussed, the second installment of your consultation fee, $250,000, has been transferred to your offshore account. Remember, full compliance with the new curriculum is mandatory. We trust you'll continue to handle any internal resistance appropriately. Best regards, Michael Carter Global Education Initiative Foundation." Erin's hands shook as she clicked through more emails. There were dozens from the same organization, all mentioning payments, all emphasizing compliance with the new standards. "What are you doing?" She spun around. Crass stood in the doorway, his face dark with fury. His phone was still in his hand. "You're taking bribes," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "To implement standards that hurt our students." "Why? You have no idea what you're talking about." He walked to his desk and slammed the laptop shut. "And you no longer have a position at this school. Clear out your classroom by the end of the day." I'll fight this. I'll report what I found. Report what? He smiled coldly. That you violated school policy by accessing an administrator's private communications? That you've been spreading conspiracy theories online? Clean out your room, Ms. Sullivan. And consider yourself lucky if that's all that happens. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Erin stood, grabbing her bag. At the door, she turned back. This isn't over. Yes, Crass said, already picking up his phone again. It is. As Erin walked to her classroom, her mind raced. She had no proof, no photos, no recordings. But she'd seen enough. The new standards, the payments, the pressure to comply. It was all connected. She pulled out her phone and opened her YouTube app. They might have taken her job, but they couldn't silence her voice. Not yet, anyway.